Good evening and welcome to Contemplating the Universe. I'm your host, Leslie Zehr, and this evening I'm also your speaker. Tonight I'm going to talk about the Al-chemia Remedies as catalysts for the transformational process. And the Al-chemia Remedies are a set of flower and sacred site remedies that were made in Egypt in the years 2000 and 2001. This is a project that I began probably 2 years prior to that, researching different types of flowers and trying to find out what things were indigenous to Egypt. And I spent 2 years studying, and then the day that I made the remedies, I just threw all that away and realized that it was an intuitive process, and the remedies that needed to be made would be made, and the ones that didn't need to be made didn't. And it was an interesting process to go through all this research, but as I said, in the end I realized it was more an intuitive process. But I really was trying to determine what were indigenous plants to Egypt, and a lot of the references that I was using were really about ancient plants and what the pharaohs used, and so this was going back 5,000 years or something. I really wanted to know what they had used, and realized that a lot of things had been imported at that period of time. So what did that mean? If those plants were originally from somewhere else, were they not indigenous? Yet they'd been here for 5,000 years. So the whole question of what is indigenous and what isn't sort of came to mind. Then I really, as I said, I did it as an intuitive process because I felt that this was just too much intellectualizing about what it was, and if something had been here for 5,000 years, then it probably could now be considered indigenous. So as I said, I just left that research, and that was really obvious. And it was interesting. It did teach me a lot, but not necessarily about the flower remedies or these particular flower remedies. And when I started this project, I had been studying homeopathy. For me, I've never actually practiced. I do have a diploma in homeopathy, but I've never practiced as a homeopath. And I really feel that it was more about building a base and really understanding how energetic medicines work more than that I would ever practice as a homeopath, and maybe someday I will, but I don't think that that's what it was about. I really think it was about going back and relearning something that probably I had always known, but I needed to revive that part of my understanding. So studying homeopathy for all that time really, I think, gave me a good base and made me understand energies and how you capture energies and that type of thing. And I had taken a course on the Australian bush flower remedies, and one of the people teaching the course was Ian Watson, and I had said something to him. I guess I had already started this project at that time when I took that course, and I said that I was doing this, and he was very encouraging and said, just do it. And so I thought, yes, that's right, I need to just do this. So I did. The day that I decided to go to the garden and collect the flowers, really they spoke to me. It was obvious which ones were going to be made and which ones weren't. And even it was a place, and I'll show you some pictures of the garden. It was a place that I used to take my children to every day, and we'd play there, and so we would interact with the flowers all the time. And it was more probably they were playing and I was sitting and looking at the flowers, but so I was very familiar with them. The day that we made the flower remedies, I really just walked into the garden, and it was as if they were calling to me. Certain ones were ready to be made, and other ones just didn't seem to be present somehow. And one of them that I wanted to make was never open. There were a couple of occasions when I made the different flower remedies, and this particular flower would never open at the time that I was there to make the remedies. So I finally realized I should not make a remedy from that flower. And later I understood why, because it's actually the sausage tree, which is a very interesting tree and something I was really attracted to, and it's pollinated by bats. For those of you who know me know that the bat is one of my totems, so I was very much attracted to that. I wanted to make that remedy, but I can see that it wasn't a good idea, and then later on I really began to understand why that probably wasn't a good idea. So I didn't make that, but I made the other ones. And the remedies were made in the year 2000 and 2001, and they were made on an island in the Nile. And this island is one of the chakra points along the Nile. The Nile represents the serpent energy, the Kundalini energy. And this island is one of them. And because it's an island, it's very remote and undisturbed. And so I think it's a very sacred place. And there was a sacred garden. And this was a piece of land that was owned by the families. So it was some place that I went every summer. And I would spend the summer there, and it was very remote, but also there was no electricity. The houses didn't have running water, so it wasn't some place that you kind of found a lot of people hanging out. You had to really want to be there, so that also, I think, made it more sacred in that it somehow was preserving itself. So this is a picture of one of the huge boats that used to go down the Nile. So every summer when I was there, I used to just sit by the Nile and I would watch the boats go down the Nile and just see nature and interact with that. And as I said, I would go to the garden with my children. The garden is actually right in the center of the island. So again, it's a very preserved place. The island, I think, is about 200 acres or 250 acres. So this garden is just in the center of it. But along the Nile, you can watch the boats, and I would sit and I would watch the Nile lilies. When they would open the dam at the end of the summer, you would see these huge clumps. They're like green clumps, and they would just float down the Nile. And at some point, they find a way to attach themselves. They go closer to the banks of the Nile. And so it's just green foliage that's floating down the Nile. But when it gets to this place where it's in more shallow water, it sends down its roots. And when it does that, then it sends up this beautiful flower. And it's known as the Nile lily. It's actually a water hyacinth, but it's called the Nile lily. It's a beautiful flower, and I'll show you a close-up picture of it. But I want you to see how dense it is, because what happens then also is that these clumps tend to go into the canals and actually block up the canals. So these things that are very beautiful, and as I said, when I would see them, they were just kind of a clump that was floating down the middle of the Nile, but eventually they can kind of just take over and block canals or fill in wherever there's low-lying water. So when I would watch these, I really got a feeling that somehow this was very metaphoric as far as how I felt or what I felt Egypt was all about, in that it's very densely populated. And so there's all these people that somehow, when you really ground yourself, you have that moment to shine, and this foliage sends up this beautiful flower, this purple flower. It's just that moment when you ground yourself, that you really unfold and connect and become whatever it is that you're meant to be in. In this case, it's a beautiful flower. So that was what really inspired me to make these remedies, because I used to watch them, and there was something about that. There was something very magical that I just felt needed to be captured. So that was my inspiration. The Nile lily was my inspiration for making the remedies. And again, I started making them, and I went into the garden and I chose flowers and I made the remedies, and then that was, I believe, the summer of 2000, and then I went back at Easter time the next spring, and I made some more remedies, and I actually made the Easter lily, which is one of the flowers. I made it on Coptic Easter, which is different than Western Easter. So it was through those 2 years that I made the flowers. I call them the Al-chemia Remedies, and actually they were not named the Al-chemia Remedies until I finished them. The last remedy was made during the Venus transit, June 2004. I believe it was June 8th, 2004. And it was the beginning of the Venus transit, which ended in 2012. But it was made at a sacred site. The last 2 remedies actually were sacred site remedies. They were not flower remedies. And I knew when I made that last remedy that it was the last remedy and that this was a set of remedies. And when I finished and I put them all together, I discovered that there were 20 remedies, 18 flowers, and 2 sacred sites, but together they make 20. And 20 is actually the goddess number, so that was very fitting. And there was another flower that I had made, but never got to do any of the intuiting on it, and I still have it, but I knew it wasn't part of this set. I knew that this set was those 20 remedies, and that this flower would be needed at some point in time, but not in conjunction with those, that those somehow needed to be used together. So I then had these remedies and didn't quite know what to do with them, because I had made them through guidance, and then my guidance stopped in a way. And there I was with these remedies, but not knowing exactly what I should do with them now. So then I had an encounter with a woman who was a Native American medicine woman, and I told her what I had done and that I had made these. And at that point I had only made the flower remedies. And I had told her how I had made them, and she was very encouraging, and she said, yes, this is exactly how we do. I guess in Native American medicine they must make types of remedies as well. And so she was very encouraging that I really needed to get it out there. So this was the spring of 2003. And then in the fall of 2003 was when I actually made the website, and that was when I kind of put it out there. The last 2 remedies, the sacred site remedies, were made in 2004. So in the beginning they were just flower remedies, but then those 2 sacred sites were added. The remedies are called the Al-chemia Remedies. The ancient name for Egypt is Al-chem or Al-kehmet, but it's all variations of the word alchemy. And alchemy is all about transformation. The black soil of Egypt was considered the primal matter for the alchemical process, which is why it was named as such. And I believe that Egypt still holds this energy of transformation. It's held in the stones of the temples, but it's just held in the soil and in the land. And I think that anybody who comes to Egypt realizes that this is a place of transformation. There are very few people that feel neutral about it. Most people either love it or hate it, and I think that is really depending upon where you are in your process. If you see things as a challenge and you want to move through things, then I think you learn your lessons twice as quickly. But if you're not prepared for that, then probably it could be a slap in the face, because it is a very powerful. The energy is very potent, and as I said, it will challenge you. So that was one of the inspirations for making the flower remedies, was that I feel that they are flower remedies, but they're also environmental remedies in the sense that they're holding that energy, and they're holding it through a plant. But this plant has grown here. This plant was birthed and grew and unfolded in this land, so it holds that energy. And as I said in the very beginning, when I was talking about indigenous or non-indigenous plants, I think that the energy here and the land here is such that if you are not meant to be here, it will expel you. You will be thrown out. So it just seems to me that any plants that were not meant to be here would just not thrive here. And there are plants that will not grow in Egypt, and it's very interesting to look at those because, again, that could be yet another exploration. I had the experience, I had bought some purple basil in the U.S. when I was there one year. I had bought some seeds thinking, oh, this would be interesting to plant purple basil. Basil is actually something that's grown in Egypt, and it's in huge amounts. It's made into an essential oil. It grows very easily here. So I bought this purple basil thinking this would be something different, and I planted it, and it was really interesting because it started to come up purple, and then it reverted back to something else. And I was just watching this plant as it did this, and there just was no way that it was going to come out this purple basil. So I thought that was very, again, very metaphoric in that there's a power here, there's an energy here that's either going to let you do something or not let you do it. And in this case, it was not going to allow this basil to come up purple. It was going to revert back to probably what one of the parents was before it had been bred into purple basil. So again, that was very interesting to me to watch this process. And that's another thing that convinced me that whatever plants are growing here are the ones that need to be here, and the ones that have adapted, whatever they are. If they're here, that means they're meant to be here, and that means they're growing in such a way that the way it should be, and they are manifesting in the way that they should. So that kind of took my mind off of thinking too much about what I was doing or which ones I was doing and making any kind of conscious choices. So the remedies were made, as I said, on this island. It's called the Isis garden, the garden in which I made them. And I'll just show some pictures of the garden. It's right in the center of the island. The island is a mango plantation. It was made into a mango plantation, I think, a couple hundred years ago. So it's quite old. The mango trees are huge. They're probably like 3-story buildings. And this garden is right at the very center. There's an old Tudor house right in that garden. So in the garden there's the Tudor house, which was built by the man who first settled the island or made it into a mango plantation, bringing mangoes from India mainly. But then also there are varieties that were created on this island. It's called Depcha Island, and the Depcha mango was first made here. And so there's this Tudor house. All of this is on the garden. And then there's another thing that we call the castle, and it's actually another structure. You can't see it too well. It's back behind the trees, and that's actually the sausage tree there that I had wanted to make the remedy out of that wasn't going to let me. But it's a very interesting tree. I don't think you can see the flowers on it, but they're really fascinating. So we'll see, maybe someday, or maybe not. If it doesn't want to be made, that's fine. So there are these different structures. There's the castle, and there's what's called the kushk, which is this wooden house, the Tudor house. And then the reason it's called the Isis garden is because there's a structure, a sculpture, that it was made in the garden, and this is it, and it's of Isis. And it was made by a very famous Italian sculptor who's also an alchemist. And maybe that's a little bit better picture. To the right are her feet, and to the left would be the head, and right in the center there's a spiral where there is planted, or there was planted, you can see in this one an almond tree that comes out of the center of that spiral. So we're looking here from the top of her head, and you see the spiral in the center, and then her feet. So this is a sculpture of Isis, and it's actually part of a greater sculpture that is called Una Scultura, and there are 4 pieces to this bigger concept, because the 4 pieces are actually in different countries at the different cardinal points. This is the one for the south. So, and they all fit together, as I said, not physically because they're in different countries, but on another plane they all fit together. So this is why it was called the Isis Garden, because Isis is here, and there very much is that, or was that Isis energy there. So this is where I made the remedies, where I would come every day with my children, and they would run around and play, and I would sit and look at the different flowers that were growing there. And it really was a magical place, and anyone that ever went there felt the energy that the garden emitted. So you could really feel the presence there. It's a very remote place, so it was a very sacred energy. Most of the people there are Bedouins that had settled just in the area as farmers. So it is a very sacred place, and it's a very well-protected place because it's just off the beaten path. It's not easy to get there. And as I said, this is in the very center of the island, so it's protected even by the rest of the mango trees. And again, mango trees are very sacred trees, so the fact that this is protected by all of that is also quite interesting. I think I want to speak a little bit about the remedies. I mentioned that they're called the Al-chemia Remedies and that they are for transformation, and they hold this very powerful energy of Egypt. But each set of remedies, whether it's the Bach flower remedies or the Australian bush, generally each set of remedies has a theme. It has, or a focus. The Bach flower remedies are mainly for mental states. And again, they reflect the period of time that they were made, where they were made, who made them. All of this is brought into what those remedies are. And for example, the Bach flower remedies were made in England, I believe, in the 1800s. So they were made at a period of time where people were very interested in the mind and very mental. That was when psychology, I believe, was beginning to emerge as a science, and so people were focused on mental states. They were made in England, so that's also going to change things a little bit because the climate of England is very different than, say, the climate of Egypt. The Australian bush remedies are more for emotional states. They're made in Australia, which is a place that gets a lot of sun, so it's a very powerful sun. And they were made at a period of time where we're working more with emotional states. I think they were probably made like 30 years ago. I could be wrong about that, but they were made within this century. They weren't made a very long time ago. So they're reflecting a different period of time, a different place, and generally places that have a strong sun have very powerful remedies. And I did work with the Australian bush. Those are really the only flower remedies that I've worked with. And it was they're very interesting remedies. And I think every group of remedies is interesting, but they're slightly different. So these remedies are the Al-chemia Remedies, and they're really about going back. They're about going back in time. We're using the power from this very ancient land. Again, Egypt has a very strong sun, so these are very powerful remedies. But they're basically working on this transformational process of activating DNA and going back into our history. Egypt, as we know, what's left here, the remnants that are left here, take us back 5,000 years. We know that Egypt is much older than that, and we know that our history is much older than that, and almost every day there seems to be a new archaeological find now that we've opened our minds to the idea that our history is not only 5,000 years old, but goes back tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands. But at this point in time, I think in our consciousness, we have places like Göbekli Tepe and things that are going back tens of thousands of years. So that's in our consciousness now. That's something that is pretty much mainstream media and very much accepted. I don't know whether they teach it in schools yet, but I think most people know of these places and how old we really are, meaning that we were very sophisticated tens of thousands of years ago. People thought that, well, people like in Carter's time even thought that the ancient Egyptians were very primitive. That was a bit misguided, but I think we know now what they knew. And again, that's a whole nother subject that I'm not going to go into, but we do have at least these structures that go back 5,000 years that are there, that are clear. The temples and such are structures that are still intact, so we can look at them and we can decipher them, and maybe we know that our history goes back further than that, but I think these older places are still being discovered. And again, if somebody has a knowledge of esoteric wisdom, they can go into a temple and you can just feel it. You can feel the energy that's coming from these temples and the wisdom that's there in the stones. They're like three-dimensional classrooms that you just go into and you will feel the energy. And to a certain extent, I think all of Egypt is like that. But what I'm saying is that this is very concrete. This is something we can see. This is a structure that's still there. So we are clear that that history goes back at least 5,000 years and probably more. But so we're working with a period of time that's 5,000 years is also a very long period of time. And so we know that our history goes back that far, and we can at least consciously realize how we were connected to those people 5,000 years ago. So this is important because I think it brings something to reality. To be able to touch, in a way, our history brings it to reality. If you can't, and I'm sure that people who haven't been to ancient places, maybe they can't connect as easily. If you've only seen pictures of something that's very ancient, I don't know how much of a reality it will be to you. It is a reality in your consciousness, but it's not a reality in your experience. So it may be difficult to integrate that. But the point I'm trying to make is that we all know that we have a history. We all know that we have parents and grandparents, and maybe we've met our grandparents. Or maybe we haven't, and maybe we know the names of our great-grandparents, or maybe we don't, but somehow we know there's this connection that takes us back in time, so that's probably more real. But we need to realize that our connection goes back all the way to the beginning of time, to the first cells in which we were all then related to each other. And basically this is what we need to do at this period of time, is we need to go back into our history, and the way that we do that is by activating our DNA. There's only really 10% of our DNA that we use, that we know that we use, that's activated. And the other 90%, we don't know what it's used for. Scientists call it junk DNA, which obviously it's not, because nature doesn't make junk. It doesn't make things it doesn't use. That's not useful. So it's not junk, but what is it? It has to be used for something, and even if we don't know what it is, we have to acknowledge that it's there for a reason. Well, many people believe that this is actually our history, or it's our future, and possibly it's both. Possibly it's your unfolding, or possibly it's your history. And if we want to believe that things cycle around, then maybe it's both. But the point is, whatever it is not insignificant. So we want to be able to get in there and actually become whole. And I don't believe that we will ever be whole until we use all of our potential. meaning that we have to use all of our DNA. If it holds the secrets of our past, then we need to know what those are, because just like shadow work, which is something that Carl Jung spoke about, whatever is in the darkness is still pulling on us. Whatever's in our DNA, even if we're not actively using it, energetically it's there. It's replicated. It's there in our cells. So even if we can't say that it's somehow functioning or being used, it's still there. It still exists, and it must be exerting some kind of a force just by its presence. And probably it would exert more of a force if it was actually activated, but either way, it's still there. So it is working on us. On some level, it is pulling or pushing or just taking energy to be there and to replicate. So something must be going on. And again, people who are intuiting what this is all about, many of them are saying that this is our past, and that perhaps it's a past that we don't want to remember. Perhaps we've let that DNA go to sleep because we don't want to remember what it is, or maybe we've just forgotten. But if we don't, then it's pulling or pushing on us in some way, and it's not useful. And I think if any of you have done shadow work, you know that whatever is in the shadow is still pulling. It's still exerting a force. It's still taking energy, whether we're conscious of it or not. And once we have the courage to allow these things to come out into the light and to be realized, then we can resolve them. We can transmute them. And this is a big part of the alchemical process, is to take whatever this is, to realize that whatever is our challenge is also our gift, and to be able to use it in whatever way we can. And again, if you've done shadow work, you'll realize that so much of your energy is tied up in things that may be useful, that may be qualities that are actually could be used by you, but there are things that you rejected or that you were made to believe you should reject. So they're not useful to you at this period of time. But if you bring them out, if you bring them into the light, you can either resolve them and let them go, or you can integrate them and use that energy. So basically, this is what we want to do, and this is where the remedies can help us. We can use these remedies to begin to vibrate and activate this DNA. And something I didn't say in the very beginning, which I just assumed that everybody understood, but flower remedies are an energy medicine. And basically what they are is just the energy of a plant, of a flower. Not a plant, but a flower. Steiner talked about plant signatures and how the flower is the most ethereal part of a plant. This is the ultimate. This is the most spiritual. This is the unfolding. And that's what plants have to teach us. They have unfolded, and this is what we talk about when we're talking about the enlightenment process or the transformational process, or coming, waking up or evolving in consciousness. It's all this unfolding. It's this whatever we are, whatever those seeds that were planted, which are actually our DNA, those are the things that need to unfold. Our seeds, my personal seeds and your personal seeds, need to unfold for you, because that's when you come to your fullest potential. So this is what the flower symbolizes. Some seed or plant or root or whatever was planted. The plant grew, it was nourished, and it grew, and then it unfolded to its fullest potential, and that's the flower. So that's the wisdom that the flower has. We can see by looking at the flower, it has already gone through that process. It has unfolded because it is a flower. It's like becoming a wise woman or a wise man. You're unfolding into this archetype. You've done the work, and there you are. You manifest into that. You manifest into your highest potential. So basically, the flower is an example of something that has done that, something that has lived through that process. And that's the wisdom that it holds. It holds the knowing of that process. So this is why we use flowers. And basically, the way we use flowers, or flower remedies, is we use them by how they attract us. They're the second dimension, or the second kingdom. So flowers can't actually move towards us. Minerals are the first, and they just hold a place. They're static. They hold energy. But the flower moves from the point and creates a line. It moves off of that plane into space, and it's the second kingdom. It communicates with us by attracting us. It can't move towards us. An animal, for example, if we're talking about power animals, they can walk to us. That's how an animal communicates with you, is it comes to you, because it can move through space. The flower can't do that, so it actually has to pull you in. So that's one of the qualities that flowers have, is that they are attractive. That's how you know which remedy you need to be using, is by the one that attracts you the most. Because that's how it talks to you, that's how it communicates, that's how it signals you that you need to come closer, because it can't actually move closer to you. So this is how we choose a remedy, just by the one that attracts us. And because flower remedies, or the way that flower remedies are made, is that you're basically potentizing water. And we use water because water has the ability to shift its matrix. That's why we use it for homeopathic remedies. That's why we use it for flower remedies. So we basically capture that energetic pattern, that wisdom, and information is held in waves. So if we can capture that wave pattern in the matrix of the water, then we've captured that information or that wisdom, and we can use it then. So instead of having to try to have fresh flowers around you all the time, you make flower remedies, and then you can use this. You can also apply them in different ways, which is another reason that they're useful in that form. But let's never separate ourselves from the actual flower. It's always good to keep that in mind. And in fact, the pictures that I have are pictures that I took of the original flowers that I actually used. And although they're not probably the best pictures that I could have, I have replaced a couple of them because the originals were just not good. I have replaced a few of them, but most of them are the original flower that I used. And I did that because I wanted you to see the actual plant that I was taking this remedy from. The energy of the flower is then captured in the water, and it can be used in many, infinite probably, ways. But that's the whole process of making flower remedies and capturing that energy so that we can then use it later. These particular remedies are really for transformational work. And I suppose you could say that about any remedy, because if it does some type of healing, whether it's on the mental level or the emotional level, it's going to obviously help you in the transformational process. But as I said, these are really directed at waking up that DNA. And I call them catalysts because they help you through these shifts, or they begin to create these shifts that we need in order to work through this process. So I think I'll go ahead and I'll just begin to show you the different flowers, and I'll just tell you the names of the flowers and give you an opportunity to look at them. So just spend a moment looking at them, because they are quite fascinating and attractive. You might want to just see which one really attracts you. What I did with the flowers after I made the remedies was I did do intuiting with the flowers. So I made the remedies, and then I went back and I sat with each one of the flowers and really just connected to it and listened to get the information from the flower itself as to what it was used for. And I did write that all down. And I used to have that on my website, but then I found that people were reading what was written and choosing, in a very mental process, a very left brain process, choosing remedies that were going to get them to a certain point or give them something that they felt they needed, but as I said, in a very intellectual kind of a way. So I took that all down, and at that time, affirmations came in. And somehow, to me, the affirmations were guiding people in a certain direction or giving a focus without giving too much detail that people might. I was hoping the affirmations would inspire people. And as I said, they just came in intuitively, so I just wrote them down, and it seemed like, since that was the process, that was probably the right way to do it. The affirmations are, there's a Al-chemia Remedies page on Facebook, and all the affirmations are written. The pictures of the flowers are there with the affirmations. I'm currently finishing a book on the remedies, and it will have all the pictures and all the affirmations, and it will have all the information that I intuited, because basically I want to put the information out there. I felt that people got too left brain and focused, but maybe that's somebody's process. So the information will be available to people, and they'll just have to take responsibility about how they do it. I think that information is interesting to go back and look at, but I would rather that people look at it or ask me about it. If they use remedies, I prefer that they use the remedy first and then go back, and I can tell them, what the information from the flower was. If they don't know, probably at that point they already realize what it is. But again, I would like it to be experiential first, and then perhaps in the processing it might be a good idea to understand more what the flower is about. So this is the African daisy, and this is an aloe. And all these pictures are also on my website, and I'll give you those links at the end. And these flowers impact you just by looking at them. You can have a strong reaction to them just by looking at them. I think energetically it's better when you use the remedy, because you're actually taking that energy in from the plant, but definitely visually they also have an effect on you. This is a castor oil plant, and I actually made 2 remedies out of this because it has a male and a female flower on it. You can see there's 2 very different flowers. The female is the red one and the male is the yellow one. So my intuition was to use it separately. And what's very interesting that I found out later on, I knew that Edgar Cayce had used the castor oil and did lots of intuiting with the castor oil, and even people that have followed him have written books about castor oil and all of what he said about it. And what I found in one of the books that was interesting was that he actually said that you needed the energy of the plant, and that's one of the reasons that it was so useful for almost everything. And it is called the palm of Christ. It was very much associated in ancient times with healing. So this is the flower from the castor oil plant. I made the 2 flowers separately just because that was my guidance when I was making them, but there's no reason that they can't be used together. If people felt that they shouldn't be separated, then they could be used together. So I thought it's better to make them separately, and then people can combine them if they want to. This is geranium. Geranium, I think, is the only aromatic plant that I made, the only aromatic flower. And it's not actually the flower that's aromatic, it's actually the plant. But an essential oil, this is the geranium that the essential oil is made out of. And this you find everywhere in Egypt. Egypt produces all these basil and geranium and such. None of the plants are plants that are none of the flowers are from plants that we actually use as food. Castor oil is made into an oil, but none of them are crops. But this one is, as I said, from the same plant that we do make the essential oil of geranium from. And again, if you just look at these, if you look at flowers, they're really fascinating. When you just see the complexity of what's in there, and that's a close-up of that flower. And there's usually a kind of a bundle of flowers. So that's just one of them. The others have not opened. You can see the buds there. They haven't opened yet. But if you look at it, it's really amazing. And it can just take you into a whole other world if you allow it to, which is also something else that's interesting to do. I call this orange honeysuckle. It's a vine. I have the Latin name on my on the website and on the Facebook page, but I have my own names for all of the all of the remedies. They became my friends. By the time I finished this project, I felt very close to these plants, so I have my own names for them. So basically the Latin name, the only one I don't have the Latin name for is the aloe, because in searching for which aloe that was, I found that there are hundreds of aloe and I could not identify it. And then I realized that really wasn't important because there's a picture of it. And if this is the one that attracts you, then that's what you should use, and the Latin name wasn't so significant anymore. So these do have Latin names, but I call this orange honeysuckle, even though I don't. To me it looks like honeysuckle, even though I don't believe it actually is technically honeysuckle. But it's a very interesting plant, and as I said, it's a vine. So when we look at plants, we can look at their plant signatures, and vines are always about connecting. So anything that's a vine is in some way reaching out and connecting to others. This is Indian jasmine. We call this Indian jasmine here. This one's pink. There's also a white. Frangipani is the other name for it. Plumeria, I believe, is the Latin name. And there are different colors, and this is also something that's grown in India, I believe in Hawaii, so it's probably very common to people. And it's beautiful. And it has a wonderful fragrance, at least the white one does. The pink one doesn't always. This is the white one. It has a beautiful fragrance, but it's not something that's used as a fragrance. I think that these are used in Hawaii to make a lei out of. So they are used, the flowers are used for their fragrance, but as a flower. And I believe they're used in the Far East as well. I think they're used for marriage rituals and things like that. But I don't believe that anybody extracts the fragrance for use. Maybe it can't be. Maybe the yield is too low, because I've never seen it. And who knows? New technology, maybe they will. But it does smell wonderful if you're around it. This one also actually this is jasmine. This is the common jasmine, and essential oil is also made out of that. So there are two that are made into essential oils. And again, this is like a vine. It's not exactly a vine. It's more like a bush that just kind of grows wild, and it's beautiful. And this flower is very small. That's a close-up of it, because as I said, I think it's really interesting to look at the structures of the flowers themselves. But this is quite magnified. It's not generally that large, and it's actually quite small. This is lantana. This is another one that really smells wonderful. The leaves actually smell wonderful, and they may have started making some kind of oils out of that. But this is another plant that you will see everywhere in Egypt. It's quite abundant, and it's beautiful. And it does come in different shades, different color ranges. This one, the one I made, was the orange yellow. This is called Melekatilel, and I actually made 2 preparations of this. In general, what we do with a flower remedy is that we just lay the flowers themselves on the water, and it's potentized, the water is potentized by the sun. Because the sun has a very strong force, it actually imprints the auric field of the flower onto the matrix of the water. So that's generally how you make a flower remedy. This flower, Melekatilel, is Queen of the Night, and it actually blooms at night. So I really felt that it was important to make the remedy at night. And it just so happened the full moon was coming up. So I actually made one remedy as a sun remedy, and then I made another remedy again by the light of the full moon. So this, and I don't think that there are any other flower remedies that have been made on the full moon. Maybe there are now. As far as I know, this is the only one that is actually a nighttime preparation. But it just seemed like it had to be that way because it blooms at night. And it's a fascinating flower because it is as if it speaks to you in the night. If you're walking down a street, you just will smell this beautiful, it's a very jasmine-like fragrance. And just suddenly, it comes through the air. And it's really wonderful, especially to smell that at night, because most plants bloom during the day. So it's quite mysterious to suddenly smell this beautiful fragrance coming at you out of the dark. And here's another picture of the Nile lily, the water hyacinth. So you can see more of a close-up of the flower. You can see the green foliage, but also the flower itself is really beautiful. It's that light purple, but then it just has that one part that's darker purple, and it has that little spot of yellow. So it's quite a beautiful flower. And again, this is a cone of flowers. There are many flowers on one cone, and it shoots up the cone and then it opens. This is periwinkle, which again is a very common plant, and there's many of them all over the world, different colors. It's actually a plant that they found in the rainforest, and I believe that the one from the rainforest, at least, is something they use as a treatment for cancer. I don't know a lot about that, and as I said, I'm using these remedies not for physical ailments so much as for transformational processes. But this is a very mesmerizing flower. If you actually just stare into the flower, you kind of go on this journey. It somehow it's very trippy. It activates your pineal gland, I think, and just takes you on a journey. This I call the powder puff tree. Calandra, I believe, is the Latin name. To me, they look like little powder puffs. And it's a very happy remedy. And it's a tree. I think it's an acacia tree. It's a very interesting tree because it actually closes up at night as well. The leaves begin to fold up when the darkness is coming. So a lot of these plants are interesting to just observe how they respond to the day and how they bloom and what they do. This is the Easter lily, or the Madonna lily, and this is the one that I made on Coptic Easter. I just happened to go to the farm on Easter for whatever reason, I'm not really sure, but we were there, and I was just inspired that I needed to make that all. So these actually do bloom on Easter, so we were there and they were all blooming. And they're fascinating to look at because if you actually look at the flower, if you kind of tilt your head sideways, you see that it looks like the uterus with the birth canal and the fallopian tubes attached. So it's quite, again, its plant signature is quite obvious. That's another one that's, again, a very interesting remedy to work with. This is the sacred lilac, and originally I believe it's from Latin America, and from the rainforest. And this is it's a tree. It's a fascinating tree because it really speaks to you. Like, you'll be standing there and suddenly it emits this fragrance that wasn't there when you arrived. So in some way, it's trying to communicate with you. And it's a very interesting, again, the flowers are very small and very interesting, but this is the cone. You can see all the tiny little flowers there. This is Tamrahen Hindi. I don't know another name for that. I don't know what it is in English, actually. Very beautiful, very delicate flower. And this is kind of it grows as a large bush. But it's very light. It's very happy and lacy looking. It's quite beautiful. Well, I guess they're all beautiful. But so those are the flower remedies. There's 18 of them. So there's actually 16 plants because 2 of them, I made 2 remedies. The castor oil has a male and a female, and then the Melikatilil has a sun and a moon preparation. So those are the flowers, and then there are 2 sacred sites in this set of remedies. The first one I made, I believe it was May 2004, and I made it, this is the roof of Dendera Temple, and this is a very interesting spot because if you know anything about Dendera Temple, it was Hathor's temple, and Hathor was the consort of Horus the Elder, so they were a pair, and his temple is further up the Nile. So at one point in the year, they take her statue to Idfu, to his temple, and then at another time of the year, they bring his statue from Idfu to Dendera, and then that's the sacred marriage. This particular room is where they actually would potentize the statue. And when I realized that, I thought, well, that's fascinating. If it was good enough for Hathor and this whole ceremony, I think that we should do something with that as well. So this is why I made the remedy there. This is the place that they used to potentize. They used to energize, to imbue that statue with her energy. So that's why I made the remedy there. And it was a very interesting experience to make it because I was there that May, I was visiting and just spontaneously decided that I was going to do that, and it just happened to have, I guess, a bottle of water and a bowl with me. So I filled the bowl with water and I put it right in the center of this. And basically it was about noontime, and May in Egypt is quite hot. From the end of April, it's really hot. So this was not, it's not summer, but it's definitely, it could be up to 40 degrees. So it was quite hot. So I did this. I put it in the middle of the room, and then the guards there were very nice and very supportive of what we were doing. So they went and they made us some tea, and we were all just kind of sitting around and talking, and suddenly I had the thought, I wonder how long I should leave this here. Again, I was doing this all by inspiration, but I felt I needed some kind of a plan, or at least a thought as to, we could stay here for hours. Because with the flower remedies I did do them for a very long time. I think I did them from morning up until past noontime. So the process was several hours. But I knew we were not going to be staying at this temple, sitting there for several hours. So I suddenly had this thought, I wonder how long I should be sitting here with this. And then they suddenly called noon prayers. And I knew that was it. That meant that the sun was right overhead, and that meant that we had gotten the full sun, and that was enough. That was what we needed. So I bottled up the remedy, and that's when it was done. So that was to capture the energy of Hathor. The last remedy that I made, as I said, I made during the Venus transit in June of 2004. We decided to go out into the desert to see the Venus transit, which you really can't see anything. Basically, Venus is passing between the sun and the earth. But we just were inspired to go out there and experience this, so we did. And as we were sitting out there, so actually I think we went the night before. I believe we saw the sunrise. As we were sitting there and Venus is passing in front of the sun, it occurred to me that we, as being 80% water, were all being potentized by Venus, because this is exactly how you make a flower remedy, is that you expose the auric field of the flower to the sun and it imprints on the matrix of the water. Well, if we're mainly water and we're on Earth out in the sun, and Venus is there passing in front of the sun so that the sun is shining through Venus's auric field, then we're being potentized by Venus herself. So that inspired me. We just, for whatever reason, again, we happened to be just right next to the Temple of the Sun, and I got somebody to drive me over to where it was, or we walked over, maybe we were close enough, I don't remember. Again, I happened to have a bottle of water and a vessel with me, and I just put it on the altar, and this is the altar of the Temple of the Sun, and you'll probably recognize that mandala because it's quite significant, and it occurs in many places around the world, many sacred sites and many temples. And it's the only alabaster altar in Egypt. So that's quite interesting, because alabaster is all about holding. Again, it's about holding space. And this is clearly a portal. I went and I made the remedy there. As soon as I made that remedy, then I realized that was it. I was finished. That was the last one, and that was the last one of the set. So when it was done, and that's what made the set. So those are the Al-chemia Remedies. There's 20 of them. This is the website, EgyptianFlowerRemedies.com. And I teach this course through the International Metaphysical University as a practitioner's course, a certification course. So anyone who's interested to learn more about the remedies or to be a practitioner with the remedies, that course is available. And sometimes I do teach it live, either in Egypt or in the U.S. Also, I didn't really speak much about how we use the remedies. You can use them as you use remedies, or let's say in many different ways. These remedies are not taken internally, and that was part of the guidance that I received. So you don't put them in your mouth. You don't take them internally like you do, say, the Bach flower remedies. The way that we use these remedies mainly is either in the bath, sitting in the bath. You would just put a couple of drops of the remedy in the bath and then sit in there, because again, we're trying to activate our DNA. We want to absorb the energy of this. So by sitting in the bath, first of all, it's taking you back to a very primordial place, which is like being back in the womb. But also, we want to be able to absorb that energy into our own matrix. So if our body is 80% water, then we can use the energy from the remedy to shift the matrix of the water in our own body. So this is what you're trying to do when you're sitting in the bath. And as I said, it's a very primordial experience, kind of taking you back to the womb. So that's one major way that we use the remedies. Another one is with the navel activation, which is something that I've done here and I've done in the U.S. as a live gathering. But there's also, on Amazon, there's also an MP3 that takes you through this process. It's a guided visualization. I believe the one that's on there now is the womb activation, but I will be putting up the solar plexus activation. The womb activation is for women and the solar plexus activation is for men. And then you use the remedies in the navel, because again, this is a very potent place to use it. And the other way, or the third way of using it, is to inhale it. Even though it doesn't have any smell, smell is actually a quantum sense. It's not, it's the energy of the vibrating molecule that actually makes the body and the brain respond to fragrances or to smells. So, in fact, it doesn't really matter whether something has a detectable smell or not. As soon as you inhale it, you're responding to that. And inhalation also, I believe, is a way to access the brain and the pineal gland. So by inhaling the remedies, and generally you would do that by spraying them. And the way that I usually use remedies personally is that I make elixirs out of them, which is floral water, essential oils, and the remedy. So then it does smell. I mean, then it has a beautiful smell because of the floral water and the essential oil. And I do that because I am an aromatherapist and I like working with oils and I like making something that smells beautiful as well as it being energetically active. So I make these elixirs, and that's the way mainly that I use them. So when you do spray them, they do actually have a nice fragrance. Or you could just dilute the remedy in floral water and then it would have a nice fragrance. But it's going to activate. Whether it has any fragrance or not, it's still going to activate the brain. I'm just saying that it's nice to use something that smells nice. If you're going to be inhaling it anyway, why not make it a very pleasant experience? So those are really the three ways that I recommend you can use them. Again, you can use them in infinite ways. You can apply them to the chakras. You can apply them to your hands if you're doing healing work on yourself, or there are many ways to use them, and you can be creative about how you use them. Those are the three major ways that I've worked with, that I understand the best, and that my guidance has told me to use them, and to really pursue what those three methods of application are. Be creative and use them in different ways. If you're interested in the flower remedies, all the information is on EgyptianFlowerRemedies.com. The pictures of the flowers are on there, so you can have a look at them again, and information about the course. I try to put up there whenever I'm doing a navel activation. I try to put that up there for people who are in whatever area it is that we'll be doing it. And also the link to the Amazon MP3 is on there. So I think that's about it for tonight. If you want to contact me, you can email me at mail@universaldancer.com, or there's also links on the Remedies website that you can contact me. If you have questions, please email me, and I hope that you'll join us again on another one of our webcasts. Have a good evening or a good morning if you're on this side of the world. Take care.